Princess Zarath of the Vexarian Empire had always believed her human husband was the gentlest soul in the galaxy. Marcus Thompson, with his soft brown hair and kind smile, seemed more suited to tending gardens than commanding starships. When she first met him 3 years ago at the Galactic Peace Summit, he was working as a translator for the human delegation. While other species sent their finest warriors and most cunning diplomats, humanity had sent scholars, scientists, and peaceful negotiators. Marcus spoke 17 different alien languages fluently and had spent his days helping resolve minor disputes between trading partners. He never raised his voice, never showed anger, and always found diplomatic solutions to problems. When Zarath's father, Emperor Kethron, had arranged their marriage to strengthen the alliance between their species, she had been relieved. At least her husband would be kind and gentle, unlike the brutal Corvan warriors her sisters had been forced to marry. Their life together on the peaceful moon of Serenity had been everything Zarath could have hoped for. Marcus spent his mornings in their garden, growing earth vegetables that somehow thrived in the alien soil. His tomatoes and carrots had become famous throughout their sector, and he freely shared his growing techniques with local farmers. In the afternoons, he would sit in his study, translating ancient texts and writing papers about interspecies communication. His work had actually helped prevent 3 minor wars in the past year alone. Zarath often watched him from their balcony as he worked in the garden. His movements were precise but unhurried, methodical but never aggressive. When the local children came to visit, as they often did, Marcus would patiently teach them about Earth plants and tell them stories about his homeworld. The children adored him, and their parents trusted him completely. Even the normally suspicious Corvan merchants who lived nearby had grown to respect and like the quiet human. "He is too soft for a warrior race," her sister Veliana had once commented during a family gathering. "Humans claim to be strong, but look at him. He would not last 5 minutes in real combat." Zarath had defended Marcus, but privately she agreed with her sister's assessment. Humans were clearly an intellectual species rather than a warrior one. Marcus proved this every day with his gentle nature and scholarly pursuits. When they made love, he was tender and careful, always ensuring her comfort above his own pleasure. When they disagreed, he listened patiently to her concerns and found compromises that satisfied them both. He had never even raised his voice to her, let alone shown any sign of violence. The morning everything changed started like any other. Marcus was in his garden, carefully tending to a new patch of earth strawberries he was trying to adapt to the local climate. Zarath was in the kitchen preparing breakfast using one of the human recipes he had taught her. The smell of bacon and eggs filled their home, and she could hear Marcus humming softly outside. It was a perfect, peaceful morning. The first sign of trouble came when their communication system started broadcasting an emergency alert. Zarath rushed to the main display, her 4 arms working quickly to bring up the news channels. What she saw made her blood run cold. A massive Corvan battle fleet had appeared at the edge of their solar system, flying under the banner of Warlord Grixtar, the most brutal and aggressive of the Corvan commanders. The news anchor, a nervous-looking Zenthari, was explaining that Grixtar claimed the human colony on Serenity was harboring weapons that violated the Galactic Peace Accords. He demanded immediate surrender of all human residents for questioning and trial. The local defense force, a small peacekeeping unit with only 3 aging ships, was completely outmatched. Zarath felt panic rising in her chest. The Corvan were known for their ruthlessness. Even if Marcus and the other humans were innocent, which she knew they were, Grixtar would torture them for information and likely execute them anyway. She had heard stories of entire colonies being wiped out by Corvan forces for much smaller infractions. Marcus appeared in the doorway, still holding a small pot containing a strawberry plant. His face was calm as he watched the news broadcast. How long until they reach the surface? He asked quietly. The report says they will be here within 6 hours, Zarath replied, her voice shaking. Marcus, we need to run. My father's ships are at least 2 days away, and the local defense force cannot possibly— No. Marcus set down the plant pot and moved to their communication console. Running will only make things worse for everyone else here. There are 3,000 humans on this moon, plus all the alien families who have settled here. Grixtar will hunt down and kill everyone if we flee. Zarath watched in confusion as Marcus began accessing the colony's communication systems. His fingers moved across the controls with a speed and precision she had never seen from him before. Within minutes, he had established contact with every human settlement on the moon. "This is Marcus Thompson," he said into the communicator, his voice carrying a tone of authority that was completely unfamiliar to Zarath. "All civilians are to evacuate to the underground shelters immediately. Colonial Defense Protocol 7 is now in effect. All former military personnel report to your designated rally points. We have exactly 5 hours and 43 minutes to prepare." The response was immediate and shocking to Zarath. Every human on the channel responded with crisp, "Yes, sir," acknowledgments. The gentle farmers and peaceful scholars she knew suddenly sounded like trained soldiers receiving orders from a commanding officer. "Marcus," Zarath said slowly, "what is Colonial Defense Protocol 7? He turned to her, and for just a moment, she saw something flicker in his eyes. Something cold and calculating that was gone so quickly, she wondered if she had imagined it. "It's an emergency plan we established when the colony was founded," he said, his voice returning to its usual gentle tone. "Just a precaution." But Zarath was beginning to realize that there was much about her husband that she didn't understand. Over the next few hours, she watched in amazement as the supposedly peaceful human colony transformed before her eyes. The farmers and teachers and artists she had known for 3 years suddenly became an efficient military organization. Hidden weapon caches were revealed throughout the settlements. The solar collection arrays Marcus had helped design were quickly reconfigured into powerful energy weapons. The agricultural processing plants began producing something that definitely wasn't fertilizer. Most shocking of all, the humans moved with the kind of disciplined coordination that only came from extensive military training. Marcus himself seemed to be everywhere at once, coordinating defenses and issuing orders that were followed without question. Zarath realized that somehow, without her ever noticing, her gentle husband had been the real leader of the human colony all along. "The Corvin fleet has entered the outer system," announced Dr. Sarah Chen, the colony's head botanist, who was now apparently serving as Marcus's intelligence officer. 12 heavy cruisers, 4 dreadnoughts, and approximately 60 support vessels. Grixtar is broadcasting surrender demands every 15 minutes. Marcus nodded calmly. "Estimated time to orbital insertion? 97 minutes, sir." "Good. That gives us time to complete the preparations." Marcus turned to a group of humans who had been the colony's agricultural specialists that morning and were now clearly military engineers. "Are the surface defenses ready?" "Yes, sir. All installations are hidden and powered up. The Corvins won't know what hit them." Zarath felt her world spinning. These were the same humans who had spent their time growing flowers and writing poetry. The same humans her people considered weak and overly peaceful, yet they were preparing to fight a Corvin battle fleet with the kind of confidence usually reserved for species with centuries of warrior tradition. "Marcus," she said, pulling him aside, "what's really going on here? Who are you people?" For the first time since the crisis began, Marcus's expression softened. He took her hands in his, and she could feel the calluses that she had always assumed came from gardening. Now she realized they might have come from something else entirely. "We're exactly who we've always been," he said gently. "We're farmers and teachers and scientists. We came here to build a peaceful life." His eyes met hers, and she saw the same kindness and love she had always known. "But we're also humans, Zarath, and humans have learned that sometimes, to protect peace, you have to be prepared for war." The ground shook slightly as the first Corvan ships entered the atmosphere. Through their window, Zarath could see the dark shapes of the invasion fleet descending through the clouds. There were so many of them, and they looked massive and threatening against the peaceful sky. Marcus squeezed her hands once more, then stepped back. When he spoke into his communicator, his voice carried across the entire colony. "All units, this is Thompson. The enemy is here. Remember, we're fighting not just for ourselves, but for everyone who has chosen to make this place their home. Show them what humans do to protect their families." The response that came back from hundreds of voices was unlike anything Zarath had ever heard. It was the sound of a people who had been pushed too far, who had tried diplomacy and peace and been answered with threats and violence. It was the sound of humanity preparing to remind the galaxy why they had survived long enough to reach the stars. "For serenity!" As the first Corvan dropships began their descent toward the surface, Zarath looked at her husband and realized that she was about to discover something about humans that the rest of the galaxy had somehow forgotten. Something that perhaps only showed itself when they were protecting the people they loved. Something that could be seen in their eyes. The first wave of Corvan dropships hit the surface like meteors, their heavy armor designed to shrug off conventional planetary defenses. Warlord Grixtar had brought his most elite troops for what he assumed would be a quick and brutal occupation. The Corvans were 8 feet tall, covered in natural armor plating and armed with weapons that could punch through tank armor. They had conquered 17 worlds in the past decade, and none had lasted more than a few hours against their overwhelming force. Zarath watched from the command bunker as hundreds of Corvan warriors poured out of their landing craft, roaring their traditional battle cries. Their leader, a massive brute with scars covering half his face, began broadcasting demands for immediate surrender. The alien princess felt her hearts pounding as she realized the impossible odds her husband and his people were facing. "Visual contact with enemy ground forces," reported Dr. Chen, her voice steady despite the approaching doom. "First wave consists of approximately 800 heavy infantry, plus armored support vehicles." Marcus stood before a tactical display that showed the approaching enemy forces as red dots converging on their positions. His hands moved across the controls with the same careful precision Zarath had seen him use when pruning roses, but now she understood that this wasn't the skill of a gardener. This was the expertise of someone who had studied warfare the way others studied art. "Are the civilians secure?" he asked. "All non-combatants are in the deep shelters," confirmed another human, a woman Zarath had known as a kindergarten teacher. "Environmental systems are running normally, and they have supplies for 6 weeks." "Good." Marcus touched a control, and his voice echoed across the colony's communication system. "All units, weapons free. Protect your homes." What happened next would be talked about in military academies across the galaxy for generations to come. The Corvan advance began confidently, their warriors spreading out in standard formation as they approached the human settlements. To their sensors, the colony appeared defenseless. There were no visible weapon emplacements, no military vehicles, and no signs of organized resistance. Grixtar himself laughed as he watched the display from his flagship. Then the fields exploded. The innocent-looking agricultural areas that Marcus had helped design suddenly revealed their true nature. The solar collection arrays that provided power to the greenhouses rotated and focused their energy into devastating beam weapons. Irrigation systems released clouds of metallic particles that disrupted Corvan electronics. Fertilizer storage tanks opened to reveal missile launchers that began raining death on the advancing army. But it was the humans themselves that truly shocked the invaders. The gentle farmers and teachers emerged from concealed positions with weapons that seemed impossible for their small frames to handle. They moved with the coordinated precision of elite commandos, each one taking shots that found gaps in Corvan armor with surgical accuracy. Zarath gasped as she watched Marcus's tactical display. The red dots representing enemy forces were disappearing at an alarming rate, while the blue dots representing human defenders barely moved. The humans weren't just fighting back, they were winning. "How is this possible?" she whispered. Marcus glanced at her, and for just a moment, she saw something in his eyes that made her understand why the galaxy had once feared humanity. It wasn't cruelty or bloodlust. It was something far more dangerous. It was the cold, calculating intelligence of a species that had clawed its way to the top of their homeworld's food chain, not through size or strength, but through cunning and adaptability. "Humans are persistence hunters, Zarath," he said quietly, his attention returning to the battle. "We might not be the strongest or the fastest, but we never stop learning, never stop adapting. Every war we've ever fought has taught us something new about killing." On the display, the Corvan advance had stalled completely. The survivors of the first wave were taking cover behind their landing craft, calling desperately for reinforcements. Grixtar's response was predictable. He sent more troops, convinced that overwhelming numbers would crush whatever resistance the humans had managed to organize. The second wave fared even worse than the first. The humans had used the brief respite to adjust their tactics, adapting to Corvan weapons and armor with terrifying speed. Hidden tunnels allowed them to attack from unexpected angles. Camouflaged positions provided crossfire that turned Corvan formations into killing zones. Most importantly, every human seemed to know exactly what every other human was doing, as if they shared a single mind. "Dr. Patterson's team has secured the eastern landing zone," reported Dr. Chen. "Minimal casualties on our side." "Excellent. Have them move to support the northern perimeter. The enemy will try to concentrate their forces there." Marcus touched another control. "Johnson, how are those atmospheric processors holding up?" "Running at 112% efficiency, sir. The Corvans have no idea what they're breathing." Zarath realized with growing horror what Marcus meant. The atmospheric processors that maintained the air quality for the colony had been modified to release compounds that were harmless to most species, but apparently had a debilitating effect on Corvan physiology. The invaders were literally being weakened with every breath they took. "You've been planning this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "All of this. For how long?" "Since the day we arrived," Marcus replied without hesitation. "We hoped we'd never need these preparations, but hope isn't a strategy. Humans learned long ago that the price of peace is eternal vigilance." The third wave of Corvan attackers included their heaviest armor and most experienced warriors. Grixtar himself descended to the surface in a massive assault mech that stood 30 feet tall and carried enough firepower to level a city block. The warlord's voice boomed across the battlefield as he challenged the humans to face him in direct combat. Marcus's response was to smile. It was the same gentle smile Zarath had fallen in love with, but now she could see the predator hiding behind it. "Target acquired," he said into his communicator. "All units, execute Plan Omega." What followed was a masterpiece of tactical coordination that would have impressed even Zarath's father's most experienced generals. Every human defensive position fired at once. Not at Grixtar's mech, but at specific points around it. The ground beneath the massive machine collapsed, revealing a carefully prepared trap that dropped the warlord 30 feet into a pit lined with shaped charges. The explosion that followed lit up the sky like a small sun. When the smoke cleared, there was nothing left of Grixtar or his mighty war machine except a crater full of twisted metal. The effect on the remaining Corvan forces was immediate and devastating. Without their leader, and facing an enemy that seemed to anticipate their every move, they broke and ran for their landing craft. Many didn't make it. The humans pursued them with the relentless efficiency that had made their species the apex predator on their homeworld. Enemy ground forces are in full retreat, Dr. Chen reported. Should we pursue to the landing zones? Negative, Marcus replied. Let them go. We want survivors to carry word back to the fleet. Zarath didn't understand the strategy, but she was about to learn another lesson about human warfare. The survivors who made it back to their ships carried with them tales of impossible defeat. They spoke of humans who fought like demons, who seemed to know what the Corvans were going to do before they did it themselves, and who had turned a peaceful agricultural colony into a death trap. The demoralization was so complete that when Marcus opened communications with the Corvan fleet, half of their captains immediately began maneuvering to retreat. This is Marcus Thompson, speaking for the human colony of Serenity, he said, his voice carrying across space to reach every ship in the enemy fleet. Warlord Grixtar is dead, along with most of his ground forces. You have 30 minutes to leave this system, or we will demonstrate why humanity has never lost a defensive war. The threat should have been laughable. The humans had no space fleet, no orbital weapons, and no apparent way to reach the Corvan ships, floating safely in high orbit. But the confidence in Marcus's voice, combined with the impossible defeat they had just witnessed, made the alien commanders hesitate. That hesitation lasted exactly 28 minutes and 37 seconds. Then the first Corvan ship exploded. Zarath stared at the tactical display in shock as ship after ship in the enemy fleet began detonating in brilliant flashes of light. There was no visible cause, no incoming missiles or energy beams. The massive warships were simply tearing themselves apart from the inside. How? She managed to ask. Marcus was watching the destruction with the same calm expression he wore when harvesting tomatoes. When we first arrived here, we spent considerable time studying local trade routes and traffic patterns. The Corvan fleet had to stop for refueling at 3 different stations on their way here. We've had people working at those stations for 2 years now. The implications hit Zarath like a physical blow. The humans hadn't just been preparing to defend their colony, they had been preparing to defend against threats that didn't even exist yet. They had infiltrated Corvan supply lines and planted sleeper agents across the sector, all while pretending to be peaceful farmers and scholars. The explosions are from microcharges placed in their fuel systems, Marcus continued conversationally. Completely undetectable until activated, and impossible to defuse once the sequence begins. Every ship that refueled at those stations in the past 6 months is now carrying its own destruction. The surviving Corvan ships, those few that had been lucky enough to fuel elsewhere, were already jumping to hyperspace. In less than an hour, the most feared battle fleet in the sector had been reduced to wreckage and fleeing survivors. Marcus turned to Zarath, and she finally saw his eyes clearly for the first time. They were still kind, still full of love for her, but now she could see the intelligence behind them. The calculating, predatory intelligence of a species that had fought its way across a hostile galaxy and emerged victorious not through strength, but through cunning. Now you know, he said gently. Humans aren't warriors like your people imagine warriors. We don't fight for glory or conquest. We fight to survive and to protect the things we love, and we're very, very good at it. In the days following the battle, Zarath watched her husband transform back into the gentle gardener she had married. The weapon emplacements were carefully disguised again as agricultural equipment. The humans who had fought with the precision of elite commandos returned to their roles as teachers, farmers, and researchers. The kindergarten teacher who had coordinated artillery strikes was back to reading stories to alien children. The botanist who had served as intelligence officer resumed her work developing new plant varieties. But Zarath could never unsee what she had witnessed. Every human she looked at now carried themselves with a subtle confidence that she had somehow missed before. Their movements were economical and precise. Their eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, cataloging threats and opportunities. They were still kind, still peaceful, but there was an underlying current of lethal competence that she was only now beginning to recognize. The galaxy's reaction to news of the battle was swift and dramatic. The Corvan Empire, upon learning of Grixtar's defeat and the destruction of their finest battle fleet, immediately declared humanity a Level 7 threat species, a classification reserved for civilizations capable of extinction-level warfare. Within hours, every major government was scrambling to review their diplomatic relations with Earth and its colonies. Emperor Kethron arrived 3 days later with a full ceremonial fleet, ostensibly to check on his daughter's safety, but actually to assess the human military capability for himself. Zareth watched from their garden as her father's massive dreadnought settled into orbit, surrounded by the most advanced warships the Vexarian Empire possessed. "He's scared," Marcus observed, carefully transplanting a young tomato plant while watching the ship through their home's sensors. "Your father has never brought that much firepower to a diplomatic visit." "Can you blame him?" Zareth replied, still struggling to reconcile the man she saw before her with the tactical genius who had orchestrated one of the most decisive military victories in recent history. Until 5 days ago, the entire galaxy thought humans were a minor species of peaceful scholars. Marcus paused in his gardening and looked at her directly. In his eyes, she could see the same love and gentleness that had drawn her to him, but now she also recognized the predator's intelligence that lurked beneath. It was like seeing a familiar painting in a new light and realizing it had hidden depths she had never noticed. "We are peaceful scholars," he said simply. "We're also warriors when we need to be. The two aren't mutually exclusive, despite what most species seem to think." The formal meeting between Marcus and Emperor Kethron took place in the colony's main conference room, a simple space that had hosted discussions about crop rotation and school curricula. Now it was the site of negotiations that would reshape the balance of power across 3 sectors. Zareth had attended thousands of diplomatic meetings throughout her life, but she had never seen anyone address her father with the quiet confidence that Marcus displayed. The Emperor was used to being either feared or desperately courted. Marcus treated him with respectful courtesy, as if he were simply a neighbor dropping by for tea. "Your Majesty," Marcus said, offering a slight bow that was perfectly polite but not subservient. "Welcome to Serenity. I hope you'll find your stay informative." Kethron's 4 eyes studied the human with obvious reassessment. "I confess, son-in-law, that you are not what I expected when we arranged this marriage." "I'm exactly what I've always been, Your Majesty. A man who loves your daughter and wants to protect the life we've built together." Marcus gestured to chairs around the conference table. "Though I suspect that's not what you're really here to discuss." The Emperor took his seat, his massive frame making the furniture look child-sized. "The galaxy is in chaos, Marcus Thompson. The Corvan Empire is mobilizing their reserve fleets. The Zenthari Collective is demanding emergency sessions of the Galactic Council. 3 different species have formally requested military assistance pacts with humanity. And all because of what happened here." "What happened here was self-defense," Marcus replied calmly. "We didn't attack anyone. We didn't invade anyone's territory. We simply defended our home when threatened. By completely destroying one of the most feared military forces in the galaxy." Kethron's voice rose, though whether from anger or amazement Zareth couldn't tell. Grixtar had conquered 17 worlds. His fleet had never suffered a single defeat, and you eliminated them so thoroughly that the survivors are still in shock. Marcus poured himself a cup of tea from a service that had been made by local artisans using earth ceramic techniques. His movements were unhurried, almost meditative. "Your Majesty, may I ask you a question?" Kethron nodded, clearly intrigued by the human's composure. When you first decided to ally with humanity, what did your intelligence services tell you about us? The Emperor's expression grew thoughtful. They reported that humans were a young species, technologically advanced but politically fragmented. That you had only recently achieved interstellar travel and seemed more interested in exploration and trade than conquest. All accurate, Marcus agreed. What else? That your homeworld showed evidence of extensive historical warfare, but that your current governments appeared committed to peaceful expansion. Also accurate. Did they mention what kind of warfare? Kethron was quiet for a moment, clearly accessing his memory. The reports mentioned that your species had fought constantly throughout its history, often with primitive weapons and tactics that seemed inefficient. Marcus smiled, the same gentle expression Zarath had seen 1,000 times. Inefficient by whose standards? We fought with whatever we had available. We adapted to every environment on our planet. We survived ice ages, plagues, natural disasters, and our own worst instincts. We learned to cooperate when we had to, and to compete when we couldn't cooperate. Most importantly, we learned to never give up. He set down his teacup with the careful precision that Zarath now realized was characteristic of everything he did. Your Majesty, most species in this galaxy evolved as either predators or prey, dominants or submissives, warriors or scholars. Humans evolved as survivors. We became whatever we needed to become to protect our families and our future. The implications of what Marcus was saying clearly weren't lost on the Emperor. Zarath could see her father's mind working, reassessing everything he thought he knew about humanity. You're saying that humans aren't naturally peaceful? Kethron asked slowly. We're saying that humans choose to be peaceful when peace serves our purposes, Marcus replied. We've learned that cooperation and mutual prosperity are generally more effective than conquest and domination. But when someone threatens what we've built, when someone tries to hurt our families or destroy our homes, we become something else entirely. Marcus stood and walked to the window that looked out over the colony. In the distance, human children were playing with alien youngsters in the park that had been rebuilt over one of the hidden weapon emplacements. The scene looked perfectly normal and peaceful. The Corvins made a fundamental error in their assessment of humanity, he continued. They assumed that because we prefer peace, we're weak. They thought that because we try diplomacy first, we don't understand warfare. They were wrong. He turned back to face the Emperor, and Zarath saw something in her husband's eyes that made her understand why her father had brought such a massive fleet. It wasn't fear she saw there. It was recognition. The recognition of one apex predator acknowledging another. Every human colony in the galaxy has been preparing for the day when someone would test our resolve, Marcus said quietly. We've been hoping that day would never come, but we've never stopped getting ready for it. The galaxy thought humanity was weak because we didn't conquer anyone. The truth is, we didn't conquer anyone because we didn't need to. We were busy preparing to defend ourselves from those who would. Emperor Kethron leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. And now that the galaxy knows what you're capable of? Now the galaxy gets to choose, Marcus replied. They can continue to trade with us, work with us, and benefit from our knowledge and cooperation. Or they can try to destroy us and discover what 300 human colonies have been preparing for over the past 50 years. The meeting concluded with a new treaty that significantly expanded the alliance between humanity and the Vexarian Empire. But Zarath knew the real negotiation had been about something much more fundamental than trade agreements or mutual defense pacts. It had been about recognition, the galaxy's recognition that humanity was not what it appeared to be. That evening, she found Marcus in their garden, back to tending his plants as if he hadn't just fundamentally altered the balance of galactic power. The ordinariness of the scene would have seemed impossible just a week earlier. "Do you regret it?" she asked him. "Having to reveal what you really are?" Marcus looked up from the strawberry plants he was checking for pests. "We didn't reveal what we really are," he said gently. "We revealed what we're capable of becoming when we have to. There's a difference." He stood and embraced her, and she could feel the same strong arms that had held her every night for 3 years. Arms that she now knew had once carried weapons and coordinated the deaths of hundreds of enemies. "I'm still the same man you married," he said softly. "I still love growing things more than destroying them. I still prefer reading to fighting. I still think diplomacy is more elegant than warfare. But I'm also human, and humans have learned to be whatever we need to be to protect the people we love." Zareth looked into his eyes and finally understood what she had been seeing there. It wasn't cruelty or bloodlust or even warrior's pride. It was something much more profound and much more dangerous. It was the absolute, unshakable determination of a species that had clawed its way to the stars and would let nothing stop them from reaching their potential. "Will there be more battles?" she asked. Marcus smiled and kissed her forehead gently. "I hope not. But if there are, the galaxy now knows what to expect from humanity. Sometimes the most effective way to prevent a war is to prove you're ready to win it." As they stood together in their garden under the alien stars, surrounded by the peaceful life they had built together, Zareth realized that her husband had given her the greatest gift possible. He had shown her what it truly meant to be human, not through words or promises, but through actions when everything was on the line. The galaxy would never look at humanity the same way again. And Zareth would never look at her husband the same way either. She would see him more clearly now, all of him, the gentle scholar and the lethal protector, the loving husband and the tactical genius. He was exactly what he had always been, human in all its beautiful, terrifying complexity. And she loved him more for it. The battle was over, but Zareth realized that her understanding of humanity was just beginning.